Hey everyone, there's no candidates game today, so I thought I'd go through another AlphaZero and Stockfish 8 game. Again, played in 2018 London, and we're going to look at it from AlphaZero's perspective, who was playing white. And again, AlphaZero kicks off with knight to f3, a very flexible move, as I've said in previous videos. But here Stockfish played e6, and we get into an English opening. After AlphaZero now plays c4, black played knight to f6, knight to c3, and this time Stockfish played bishop to b4, and AlphaZero protected it with the queen to c2. There was castles, a3, bishop takes knight, queen takes bishop, and then Stockfish played the super solid d6. And this game becomes quite interesting in the middle game, where everything just gets completely blocked up. And in a manner of speaking, AlphaZero actually plays like a human player, because this is kind of what humans do against computers. Kasparov did it against Deep Blue quite a lot and played quite unusual systems that were quite blocked up, and sometimes the computers really struggle with this. So AlphaZero plays b4, there was e5, e3, and then black attacked the knight on f3 with the bishop. AlphaZero just protects it, develops. There was a bishop h5, d3. As we can see from AlphaZero's setup, all their pawns are on nice squares right in front of all their pieces on this side of the board anyway, and controls a lot of squares against this knight that can't jump into d5 or e4. So continuing the game, knight b to d7 was played, maybe preparing to play c5 for black. Bishop b2, there was a rook e8, white castle kingside, and then there was queen e7. So maybe black is now preparing to play the move e4 perhaps. So queen c2 was played. I think if e4 now, then white can just take it, and if queen takes, is bishop d3 and queen e7. But I don't think either side has any problems. I use Stockfish. They would want to play knight g5 here, but then bishop g6 takes and rook to d1. And this is giving us white is ever so slightly better. I think they've got full development on the open d file, so maybe this is why the computer gives this as better, slightly better for white. Going back to the game then, after queen c2, Stockfish just played a5. So trying to disrupt the queenside pawns for AlphaZero. But AlphaZero just ignores this, because if black takes this b pawn off, then they'll just recapture with the a pawn and probably trade a pair of rooks. Instead they played h3, so maybe preparing to play g4 perhaps, or just covering this g4 square so there's no knights that can jump into it and start harassing the king side. Weirdly, Stockfish does the same thing and plays h6, and stopping any knight g5 ideas. Rook fc1 was played, b6, and then rook f1. So okay, after queen e6, I don't think AlphaZero knows what to do exactly. They're putting their rook on different squares, so they put the rook to e1 this time. And now c5. And this is where things get quite interesting. So if AlphaZero takes this off, I think black does actually quite well out of it with knight takes c5. If d4, there's knight back to d7. White can of course continue with d5 ideas. After queen e7, play knight h4. Trade the bishops. But first they have an intermezzo with knight to f5, attacking the queen. If queen d8, queen takes e2, knight c5. Again, who's winning this position? I actually prefer to play black here, because black's pawns are all on dark squares. It really limits this bishop on b2, and also it's quite a block structure, so you'd prefer to have two knights rather than a bishop and a knight. At least that's my preference anyway. So after c5 though, AlphaZero plays, I think, the interesting b5. Just blocks everything up, at least on the queen side. So rook a d8 was played by Stockfish. AlphaZero does the same, puts their rooks in the centre, and then there was knight to f8. I looked at d4 here for white. It looks quite interesting. I think black can continue with e4. After knight h2, trade the bishops. C takes d4, bishop takes d4, attacking b6. But black can ignore this with d5, because then the queen protects b6 anyway. White can go for c5, takes, and play knight to d7, bishop d4. An interesting variation once again, but white's got a passed b pawn, so maybe this is quite good for white. I think AlphaZero would have been able to convert such a structure, but again it would be quite interesting to see. So d4, a perfectly plausible move in this position. But AlphaZero played king h2 instead. There was queen d7, and now we just see AlphaZero lock everything down. First of all, there's a4, so now this queen side is completely blocked up. There's nothing for both sides to do. Queen c7 was played by Stockfish. And finally we get knight h4, so forcing the trade of bishops. So takes is played, and Stockfish actually played the very logical move d5. So now black's got threats of maybe e4 with a discovered attack against the king. So maybe white could have played e4 here straight away. However, AlphaZero played knight to f5. Now Stockfish could have gone in for this e4 check idea, but maybe it's not so good. After king g1, pawn takes d3, queen takes d3, pawn takes c4, queen takes c4. Is this good for black? I'm not so sure. If there's a trade of rooks as well, rook d1, rook e1, who's winning this variation? Well, black's got the passed c pawn, but again, white's structure is very solid. And if anything, it's probably helped white, because now they've unleashed this bishop on b2, which could become a very nice piece in the middle game, or the end game. I don't think Stockfish wants this, so e4 was off the cards. I also looked at d takes c4, and d takes c4, knight g6, and then just g3 though. This is what Stockfish 10 gave. After knight to e4, Stockfish wants to play f3 and just lock out the two knights completely. So it's got a very weird structure for white, but probably quite strong. Again, if knight to f6, then they want to play e4, takes the rook, rook takes, rook d8, and play h4. And all of a sudden Stockfish's knights are looking quite weak here. If h5 to stop h5, then just king g2. And white's got a lot of time just to make their position slightly better. If knight to e8, there's rook d5, takes, and c takes. And suddenly both sides have passed pawns. White's obviously closer to the 8th rank though. If knight d6 to block, there's takes, takes. And again, Stockfish 10 gives this a slightly better for white, and I tend to agree. Obviously it probably would end in a draw actually. I'm thinking maybe black can just play moves like f6 if they wish, and try and lock this bishop out of the game. If we just go back to the game, maybe this is why Stockfish didn't go into d takes c4 though. Obviously offers no advantage to them whatsoever. So here Stockfish actually tried to block up as well. It played d4. It locks this bishop out on b2. And AlphaZero played the logical move e4, because now it gives this square on c1 a space for the bishop to come into the position this way. So knight g6 by Stockfish, threatening to come into f4, and now bishop c1 to cover that square. If knight to f4 now, then takes will be played, e takes, and maybe white can play e5. It locks out this queen on c7, so there's no discovered attack. Play could continue g6, knight takes with check, king f8, and knight g4. Obviously this e pawn is pinned by this rook, so we can't take this knight. But then comes knight takes g4, queen takes g4, rook takes e5, and maybe queen takes f4. And suddenly white may have an advantage. Black can double rooks, but so can white with rook e4. And this rook on e5 is pinned by this queen. So yeah, you have to say advantage for white, because white's also a pawn up in this variation. So yeah, knight f4 is probably not very good for black. Instead, Stockfish played knight to e7. AlphaZero just played g4, so now has a very nice space advantage. If black ever takes this knight off and g takes, then it's easy pickings for white, because they can convert their rook to the g file, and it's just a matter of time probably until white converges all the pieces on that side of the board, and that's a dream scenario. But after knight to h7 by Stockfish, AlphaZero just plays h4, covering the square of g5. f6 was played, and maybe Stockfish here was praying that everything just got blockaded. But AlphaZero now just slowly increases their advantage. King g2, getting the king to a safety square. There was rook f8, rook h1, rook f7, and rook d to g1. So now the king's going to get out this way, go this side, and they've also got the two rooks that will come into play very soon behind these two pawns. And this is the only way now both sides can win on this side of the board, so it makes a lot of sense. Now I'm not sure on Stockfish's next move, because this looks like suicide to me. Stockfish played knight takes f5. I'm not sure why you would play this move, because after AlphaZero takes with the g pawn, king f8 and king f1, suddenly it looks really good for white. They've got the open g file all to themselves, and this h pawn does a great job of stopping this knight jumping in to g5 to block everything up. Basically all white needs to do now is put their rook on g6, probably double rooks, probably put the queen on g4, and then play moves like f4 and start taking pawns and sacking pieces. So king e7 was played by Stockfish, and let's just have a look now how AlphaZero dismantles Stockfish in this position. So okay, they begin with f4. So getting rid of their weakest pawn, I'm going to trade it for a strong e5 pawn most likely. If black takes this pawn off, then queen g4 is perfect for white because they can just recapture with the bishop. So going back to the game, knight to f8 was played instead, rerouting the knight around. But now just rook g4, preparing to double rooks. There was rook e8, rook to g1. So okay, doubling rooks, attacking g7. But king d8 defends. So okay, black's got a queen and a rook protecting the pawn for now. F takes e5 was played. And of course, if rook takes e5, there's bishop f4, pinning the rook against the queen. So Stockfish plays f takes e5. And AlphaZero calmly plays bishop to d2. And there's a very good reason for bishop d2. Basically, AlphaZero is just going to reroute their bishop to e1, probably to h4 or g3. And this is where the bishop will come in most handy and it will be most effective, as we'll see. So the rook goes to e7, the triple defending this g-pawn, but bishop e1 now. And I was thinking maybe h5 here for Stockfish to try and block out this bishop, but it doesn't really work because the rook just goes backwards. And all of a sudden this queen attacks the h-pawn. There's no way to defend it, even if king c8 takes, king to b7, bishop to d2. So black's just lost the pawn and it's easy pickings for white, to be honest. The rook can just come to g6 and it's very easy. They're just going to double on the 6th rank and attack this b6 pawn. So king d7 was played in the game. The queen went to h2, so maybe preparing a battery against e5. King c8 and now h5. So this great h5 pawn just leaves some space for this bishop to come in, attack this rook and really limit black's squares. So Stockfish prepared for this with rook d7, but then bishop h4 anyway, and all of a sudden it's really difficult for black to make a good move. Basically all they have to do now is just move the king around. Queen d6 is played, rook g6 hits the queen and there's no way to block this, so the queen goes backwards. Yes, maybe black can play knight takes g6, but then just comes rook takes g6, queen to b8, and then rook e6. So white sacked the exchange, but this is what top players do. And now two pieces attacking e5. If king b7 and black tries to just do nothing, then queen takes e5, a trade of queens. If rook d6, there's moves like rook e8. If g5 to try and just do something, then there's just bishop g3. Rook to d7 and then just king g2, and frankly these pawns are just going to be unstoppable, especially with the rook and a bishop to aid them. And the king's also going to come crashing in at some point and help out their position. So basically just e5's coming. I think once the king gets to g4, then white will play moves like e5, and it's probably lights out for black. So knight takes g6 was not played. Instead Stockfish went back with the queen to b8, and like I said, this is really easy for white. I think a human player could play this. So rook c6 check was played, king b7, and just king to e2. So okay, moving the king off the f-file. Again, we've seen this in multiple games where AlphaZero just likes to put their king in perfect safety. So there's no tricks for Stockfish. If rook c7 here to try and trade rooks, queen takes e5 is fine. And if rook takes c6, there's b takes c6 with check. King a7 to protect the queen. And bishop g3 takes, and again white's got a superior position. The rook and the bishop are attacking the g7 pawn, and there's no way for this king to actually get out into this corner now because the bishop on e5 just covers all the squares. So back to the game, queen e8 was played by Stockfish, and now just rook to g6. So threatening to take on b6, this forces black's hand, so now he is forced to play knight takes rook. Then h takes g6 is played, attacking the rook. If the rook goes to e7, then they can just take with the bishop and win the exchange back. Rook takes e7 and then just play f6. Takes, and again white's in a great position attacking this h6 pawn. If black tries to defend, then white should play queen to f2, and after a few more moves, h5, rook f7, rook c7 takes, queen f7. We see that white gets a one position after several more moves. There's checks, a few more checks come, and eventually we get two queens, and there's no perpetuals for black because after a few moves two queens will cover white's king, and that's all she wrote in that variation. So black's forced to play rook f8, they can't give the exchange back. Rook e6 is played, attacking the queen, which jumps into b8, and now White just wins another pawn, queen takes e5, there's a trade, and rook g8. So how can White finish this game off from here? They're a pawn up with the exchange down, and basically it's up to this e pawn in the centre and the king in the centre to just roll up the board, as we'll see. So rook e6 is the first move that AlphaZero plays, and I had a look at king c7 and see how White can win this game from here if black does absolutely nothing. So we'll start with king f3. If king b7, just slowly get our king up the board and then play e5. Again, if black does nothing, there's rook c6, and then finally we can play e6. And even if the rook goes to b7, this king just comes up, rook e8, king d6, and of course this bishop does a great job of just covering all these squares as well. So there's h5, and then finally just e7, let's say king a8, rook c7, and the rook goes back. So I'm just trying to play at the art of doing absolutely nothing for black here and see how White would win, but then just comes rook d7. And after rook c8, the point is we can just play rook d8, and if black takes this rook, we'll take twice and just win the game from there. So king b8, and then there's king d7 at the end, where White's just in an absolutely one position because they can take this rook if they wish, or even take this rook eventually and get a queen. And they can't move this rook because it's pinned, so black's pretty much forced to swap rooks here. I guess play will continue takes, and then maybe just king takes. And White can just play moves like f6 or g6 and get another queen. So going back to the game, instead of king c7, king a8 was played, rook takes b6, rook c7, and then just rook to d6. So White's got two extra pawns and a bishop for the rook, and this is where Stockfish resigned the game, and it was too much for them. Basically it's quite easy for White. Just going to roll the king up the board, roll this pawn up the board, and this bishop is just going to hang there and cover all these key squares. I mean, there's even cases to play b6 now as well. And yeah, AlphaZero played an absolutely smashing game here. Yeah, I just wanted to go through that because it was a great block position. It just shows how AlphaZero is slightly different from other engines where they can take advantage of blocked positions. Now don't get me wrong, I think Stockfish 8 played this quite badly in a weird way. They should never have played knight takes f5 in this position, that just opens up everything. But I suppose, yeah, okay, maybe g5's coming at some point for White, but still, knight takes f5 is not a good move. But anyway, hope you enjoyed my quick analysis of this game. If you did, please drop a like, comment or subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to put the notifications on as well. It really helps the channel out. And hopefully I'll see you tomorrow with a candidates video where it's heating up. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Have a good one and a safe one.